Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Star Wars Saturday, and I am joined by the wonderful Marco. How are you doing today?
Good. Doing well. How are you?
Good, good. I'm excited to talk about Star Wars and talk about these upcoming planetary qualifiers. My
Me
light is
too.
spasming. So let me ask you first: are you planning on going to any of these planetary qualifiers?
Not this time around. I got super busy this time of year. Almost every weekend from here until the next month and a half, 2 months is booked up. So unfortunately, I can't make it around this time, but I plan on trying to make it for the next round of PQs.
Well, though you aren't going to be playing this time around, I wanted to kind of talk to you and see what you thought was going to be played in these qualifiers. Like, what do you expect the meta to look like?
So I think the meta is very predictable as of right now. I think you're going to see your handful of Sabine ECLs, Energy Conversion Labs ECL. I think you're going to see your handful of Bosk Yellows, and then there's going to be the typical control decks as well, whether they are the Palpatine Green, the one Bosk Blue that has been kind of on the rise lately, and I think Krennic is also something that is still strong. Still comes out early. It has a bunch of restore. Has that blue green combo with ECL that I think is pretty strong. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those. And I think a scattering of Han 1 blue or Han 2 blue, the new Han with blue base, um, and maybe some Rays. I think Ray is pretty strong in this meta as well.
Interesting. I love that. So, I know that you and I have talked a little bit about some of these decks, and I'm kind of curious how you feel about Boba Yellow. Boba Yellow, in particular, being popular. Do you expect to see a lot of that, or do you think people are going to go kind of the opposite route, maybe, and try to bring decks that do well versus Boba Yellow?
I think you're going to see a fair amount of Boba Yellow. I think Boba Yellow is popular for a reason. I think it's strong for a reason. I think Cunning, being able to play it for 4 resources, is just one of the best values in the game. It's well balanced for any kind of matchup where you can discard against control to try and get one of the removals out. You can exhaust and bounce against a tough aggro matchup. And if you want to press the attack, you can always give one of your units +4 attack. And there's just so many things you can do with Cunning. And that's pretty much the staple of a Boba Yellow. And the reason why Boba is so good is you can ready up resources and get more cards out into play, affect the game in a way that other leaders can't. And it's just so well matched against so many different kinds of play styles that I think Boba Yellow is just, it's at the top for a reason. You see it everywhere for a reason. Um, and I'm sure there's going to be some decks designed to counter Boba Yellow specifically. Um, but even then, I think it's tough. I think it's a tough matchup no matter what deck you use. I think it's very strong. I tried out Boba Yellow for the first time 2 weeks ago, um, tweaked it a little bit, and brought it to a weekly and went undefeated with it with only about a week practice with it. And it's just once you understand the lines of play and what to kind of get ready for based on your matchup, it's just so strong. It's so great.
So, understanding the lines of play. In Hearthstone, we say you go face. In Star Wars, I say you go base. And that's that's how I like to play. You just go base. You hit them in the base as much as you can. Uh, Interestingly, if we expect to see a lot of boba, that also will mean boba mirror matches. Now, I kind of want to get your thoughts on the mirror match and talk about that for a minute.
You know, it's interesting. It's tough. I haven't played too many against the mirror. And there's just so many ways that one move can make the difference. I feel like in a mirror match, if you're able to, and it's not necessarily being able to get your boba out first, which I think is interesting. That if you're the first to deploy your boba, doesn't mean that you always have the advantage. Because it could be a trap. It could be someone waiting to no good to me dead, to exhaust it for 2 rounds. It could be someone's waiting on a cunning, to exhaust it, exhaust another unit, and bounce something. Um, so it's kind of, I think whoever's going to win that mirror matchup is the one that predicts their opponent's hand the best. If you're expecting a cunning to be played against you, um, trying to do something where you can get it out of your opponent's hand with a Bodhi Rook, to have them discard it, and then you can take a look at their hand on the Boba flip turn play, so you can kind of plan around it. That's another reason why starting off the game with a Viper Probe Droid is great, because you get to take a look at the hand and see the strategy over the next couple turns, assuming it doesn't change based on their draw afterwards. Um, so for those mirror matchups, I think it really depends on how well you know Boba Yellow and how well you're able to try and predict what your opponent's going to do and try and stay one step ahead of them, in that type of Boba Yellow matchup.
Yeah, that's very good advice. And I think especially the no good to me dead, man, that card is so good against Boba. It's can feel very like game ending in some cases.
It's tough to come back from. A
Yeah.
good no good to me dead play on an important unit uh, can really just turn the tide.
Then that brings me to talking about sideboards. So for the PQs, you can bring your minimum 50 card deck plus your leader and base, and then you can have up to a 10 card sideboard. And these are going to be best of threes. So the first game, you're going to start with your initial list and then be able to, for games 2 and potentially game 3, you can switch out a couple of those cards from the sideboards. So talk about sideboards for a little bit because there might be some people who maybe they're new to card games like you are, or they haven't played in a tournament versus just playing like their single deck at home. So maybe they aren't very familiar with sideboards and kind of the strategy there.
So that's really interesting because I'm completely new to TCGs. But not only that, most of the time I play best of ones. So while I think about a sideboard and what I would do in big tournaments for best of threes, it's something that I've tried strategizing around, and I don't even know if I'm doing it the right way. Um, so when I was coming up with a sideboard for Boba Yellow, I think the hardest matchups for Boba Yellow is either a hard aggro or hard control. Um, and if you're going to start thinking about that and building your sideboard around that kind of matchup, I think holding on to the lurking ties into the sideboard is important for control matchups. Things like Overwhelming Barrage can't hit it. Things like Power of the Dark Side completely nullifies it with a Lurking Tie Phantom on the board, simply because it can't be damaged by or captured or defeated by opposing cards. So against that hard control matchup, I think Tie Phantoms are important to try and mitigate some of that damage, as well as I tend to like a new adventure in Boba Yellow. And I think it's pretty interesting in some control matchups. I think a lot of control you're going to see villainy, um, especially because blue villainy control is just so powerful. It's so good. Um, but you can run into a palp that can take one of your units. You can run into a traitorous that just takes one of your units away that costs 3 or less, that can really throw off your game. But if you have a new adventure, you can bounce it back to your hand, then play it back down for free. Kind of like a cheaper, faster waylay. Because the way a new adventure works is you bounce it back to the controller's hand, then the controller or the owner of the card gets to play it back down for free. I think there's a lot of interesting things you can do with a new adventure. I always like to have it in my back pocket, especially with the fun things you can do with a new adventure. that we can get into later. I think there's tons of different plays for it. Um, but for the sideboard against Heart Control, I do like a new adventure, and I do like Lurking Tie when it comes to um, that hard control or the hard aggro. Uh, I think having uh, the use of Sentinels, having the Gamorrean Guards on the side, that is a 4 cost, drops down for 4/4 stats, 4 attack, 4 health, and almost always will have Sentinel because it's Boba Yellow. You'll have yellow units out there as well. Can slow down hard aggro on the ground. And then if you're thinking about if they're trying to lane dodge and go to space, you might want to have some space sentinels in there as well. Um, there's the 3/2 plain villainy ship that I'm blanking on the name right now. But anything to kind of slow down hard aggro in this sideboard, it's not something you're going to need all the time, and that's why you don't want to put it in the main deck. Uh, but when you need it, it's good to have in your hand, especially with the if your opponent's moving too fast and hitting you in the base like really hard, then you got to find ways to kind of slow it down until you can catch up, especially as a tempo deck.
Yeah, completely agree. I love those sideboard choices for that deck. That's very, very good. So, thank you. Now, talking about the PQs, I did just want to bring up last week in last week's video, I was talking about the PQs and just reviewing them as a whole, what we can expect, and the initial pricing. Now, they did listen to community feedback and make a post talking about kind of their changes to what the pricing is going to look like, which means they're sending out an additional 64 participation prize cards. So all of the stores will have 128 participation prize cards, which for me, I'm like, that's fantastic. That's a very, very good change because it wasn't a participation prize if you didn't have enough for everybody. Uh, and then they talked about sending out some additional prize support, like some boxes and stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think they released it this past week. An announcement that they are sending some more prize support, some more participation um, cards to for those that are entering into the PQs, as well as a little bit more details as to what happens if you win one of the planetary qualifiers and what it means to have that day one buy at Worlds, which I thought was interesting as well. They're going to have an event for those that do get the day one buy, so that you have something to do that first day during Worlds. But I think it's a good sign that they're kind of listening to feedback and willing to pivot, especially right away. I think them understanding kind of where the frustration is with the players, especially if you have to travel for something like this, and you want to make it worthwhile if you're going to be planning your weekend around it, and you kind of want a little bit of value in return for signing up with a big tournament like this. So I think it's a good thing that they have been able to kind of work quickly and trying to resolve some of the issues that they heard from the players. Um, and I'm excited to see what they kind of do in the future. I know they got a bunch of feedback with the card choices, the ones for the top 8, and as well as the card handouts for entering into the event. They weren't too exciting. They're not cards that I feel like are used quite often, and they they heard us. They heard the frustration from the players, and they're talking with the team to try and make it better. So I think that's a good sign. And we can kind of just wait and see how everything kind of plays out this weekend, and see how smoothly it goes, and see their announcements for the future and how they'll improve going forward as well, which is nice to see.
Yeah, and it's really interesting as well. In that post, you talked about how they also mentioned more for winners, not only getting that day one buy, but now they're also adding in on that day one of the Galactic Championships. They're going to have a special event for those winners with exclusive swag and stuff, is what they said. So that sounds really cool to me. And I like that they are going to have something for those people to do on day one, so that they can still go to the event. They can kind of be a part of it. They can have something to do on the first day rather than just waiting a whole day before they even play. Because, depending on what the formatting is for those Galactic Championships, which we don't know quite yet, but if it were to be some sort of like single or double elimination kind of thing on day two, that would feel really bad to go to the event, skip over day one, and then get eliminated immediately. So I like that they at least have something, and I hope that it's not a single elimination immediately on day two. But depending on again the formatting and how that works, then we'll see. But there's going to be so many events that there's going to be a lot of players going into day two. So I don't suspect that they are going to do something like a single elimination, and likely not double elimination. I think that would take way too long with that many players.
Yeah, yeah. And as you said, something special for the winners of the PQs in that first day uh, is something that's needed because, there's so much hype around the PQs right now, and so many people are traveling, even across states to play in these PQs. And knowing that first place is on the line and then there's rewards in the future for something like that is just, it's got to be a good feeling if you win first in a PQ, knowing that you have future things to look forward to than just the prizes that day. And getting that special treatment on that day one can just carry that championship feeling into worlds where you feel good on that first day by, and that can boost your confidence going and starting off in day two. So I think it's a really cool thing that they announced, and it'll be exciting for those who get first this weekend.
Yeah. Yep. And this weekend is the very first weekend. I think the only other piece of feedback that I kind of saw a lot was the limited amount of events that they have for this very first season. And they did say, yes, that they are going to be increasing that once set three comes out, once Twilight of the Republic is out. But it does feel like there are very few events. And with stores having smaller potential seating. Like, not every store is going to be able to have the capacity to even host 128 players. But, then the limited amount of events as well means that not very many people are going to be playing in this first month. But there's definitely interest for it. Some stores already have wait lists, they're already full. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see what comes out of this very first weekend.
I agree. I hope that it kind of gets spread around a little bit more in the next PQ. It's more available to more people depending on where they live, so you don't have to travel as much. Kind of plan around a whole weekend around it. There's some fun in that, but I understand for some people it's too far of a trip, and having some that are just a little bit closer to where they live can mean the difference, and whether or not they can participate and play in something like this. So yeah, I hope in the future there's definitely a little bit more of the events that are spread out, and that more people can have the opportunity to play in these tournaments.
Absolutely. Completely agreed. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this week to chat about the first weekend of PQs and what we expect to see. It was an absolute pleasure to have you, Marco.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to see how the top decks play out in PQs this weekend, and good luck to everyone competing this weekend.
Yes, absolutely. Good luck, everyone who is competing, and hopefully we'll see you at one of the events if you are going to be there. So, thank you so much for checking this week's Star Wars Saturday video out, and we'll see you in the next one.